Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. This is the summer 19 session. Our book is Introduction to World Philosophy, and we're going over Lao Tzu's Dao-de-Jing and Confucius's Analects today. And the questions we're going over are for exam 4, part B, question 5 and 6. In the Dao-de-Jing, why does Lao Tzu think the best government is least active? And in the Dao-de-Jing, why does Lao Tzu criticize the Confucian virtues of Ren and Yi? Do you agree or disagree with Lao Tzu? Why? So Ren and Li. If you look on page 66 of the introductory notes to the Dao-de-Jing, in the middle of the page there, it reads, "This leads Lao Tzu to criticize Confucian ideas directly in various passages, maintaining that virtue, Ren, righteousness, Yi, and propriety, Li, are signs of desperation and decline. All result from self-examination and training." So what Lao Tzu will say is, don't mess with nature. The Tao will automatically unfold in the appropriate way if you don't meddle with it too much. So if you start focusing on how to develop the moral virtues, you've already revealed the slippery slope away from virtue, which is just allowing the Tao to unfold naturally. And I'll read it. So before that, middle of the page there, I will read up at the top of the page, actually starting at the bottom of page 65. Confucius, in elaborating his account of the superior person, refuses to say anything about human nature, the nature of the universe, or God. He treats Tao the way as a purely ethical concept, the right way to live. Lao Tzu, in contrast, begins with metaphysical speculation about Tao, which he takes as the way the universe works, and identifies with the One, which underlies everything but admits no description. Lao Tzu nevertheless takes the Tao as having moral force. Tao, embodied in an individual thing, is the thing's day, its power, force, nature, character, or virtue. It is an active principle guiding the thing. It also determines what the thing ought to do and be. The excellence of the thing thus stems from its Tao. All right, and we're going to see a similar ethics in Aristotle and, following him, St. Thomas Aquinas. They say, St. Thomas Aquinas will say, God created nature, so each thing follows its own nature towards the good, because it's rooted in the ultimate good, which is God's will. So this idea of the Tao is one undifferentiated source of being beyond description with words. If you try to describe it with words, you're going to, a word represents one single thing, but the Tao represents everything. So you can't use words which isolate things into particular concepts to describe the source of all concepts. That's how the Dao-de-Jing begins. This is the Tao that can be trodden, is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Nameless, it is the origin of heaven and earth. Named, it is the mother of 10,000 things. So I'll get into more excerpts from this Dao-de-Jing itself, but this idea of the day. So there's the Tao, undifferentiated one, and then as it manifests in all of the different species of being, each of those categories of the Tao, once it's manifesting into the 10,000 things, has its own day. The day is a mechanical force of nature, but it's also a moral force. And that is the reason Lao Tzu says you should not meddle with nature, because it automatically strives for its own eternal excellence. And the more you mess with it, the more harm you're going to do. So that's why he's against the Confucian virtues, the idea of perfecting yourself through study and practice. It's like the difference between sculpting a marble block into a beautiful icon of perfect virtue, which would be Confucius's ideal, and Lao Tzu's idea of the uncarved block, which is Pooh, P-U. So there's another book, The Tao of Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, the bear, who is similar to the Taoist ideal in the sense that he doesn't try to strive to become anything. He just lets himself be what he is. So there's the the reason that Lao Tzu disrespects the Confucian virtues of Ren and Yi, and he does say that it's the beginning of the end when you start thinking that way. And it's the same rationale behind his idea of the government should do as little as possible in order to be as good as possible. Why? Because things already tend towards the best naturally. That's the process of the Tao. So let it be, let it go. Don't study too much because you don't need to. Things are taking care of themselves. There is a divine transcendental way of things that automatically tends towards what is good. So that's the nutshell. I'll actually read a little bit more of these introductory notes because I think they do a pretty good job here. So this twofold character of day, power and virtue, or in different terminology, moving and regulating principle, causal force, and moral norm, leads to the distinctive ethical principles of Taoism. What a thing is and what it ought to be are intertwined. Things naturally tend toward what they ought to be. Day flows both from and toward the Tao. So we'll see that idea of everything comes from the Tao and heads back towards it. That's its ultimate telos, its end, its purpose. Its purpose is found in its source. Its physical source, also its moral source, its moral goal, how to be the best it can be. It's to return to the source, which is the Tao. So Lao Tzu therefore advocates inaction. If things naturally tend towards what they ought to be, we should leave them alone. Our interference is more likely to do harm than good. Lao Tzu therefore recommends simplicity and tranquility. It might seem that he recommends passivity and laziness, but the inaction, wu wei, he recommends, it's the Chinese word, is that of letting nature take its course. We should let the guiding principles of things, that's the day, guide them without interference. The Tao flows naturally, spontaneously, underpinning a world in which things naturally tend toward what they ought to be. The coincidence of guiding and regulating principles in day means that things naturally tend toward their own state of excellence. Okay, so there. That's a good enough of a introductory note, and now I will turn to the texts of the Dao-de-Jing. I already read the first verse. The Tao that can be trodden is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Nameless, it is the origin of heaven and earth. Named, it is the mother of 10,000 things. So once you give it a name, now you've categorized the Tao. Once you're on that process of categorizing things, that's the source of the multiplicity that emerges from the Tao. But the Taoist philosophy is that there really aren't many things. That's like a dream, which you have to wake up. The Great Awakening, Shuangzi said that, we saw about there is a Great Awakening. So when you realize all of these different objects and species of being are actually rooted in the Tao, and there's no ultimate difference between one thing and another, we're all one, that is when your own, whatever species of being you are, will unfold automatically. And without trying to do anything, you'll perfectly fulfill your duty. And not only that, but you'll influence those around you and even nature itself. So I will read a few excerpts from here to get to the, to address specifically the exam questions for Part B. So page 67, this is section 10. So there's numbered paragraphs. In loving the people and governing the state, can you practice inaction? That's wu wei. In opening and shutting heaven's gate, can you be the female? In understanding all, can you be without knowledge? To produce, to nourish, to produce without claiming, to act without boasting, to preside without control. This is called the dark virtue. All right, so that addressed the first question that we're going over, which is, why does Lao Tzu recommend inaction for the government? So let me just read these questions again. In the Dao-de-Jing, why does Lao Tzu think the best government is least active? And then in the Dao-de-Jing, why does Lao Tzu criticize the Confucian virtues of Ren and Yi? So in loving the people and governing the state, can you practice inaction? So that's the beginning of the answer to this question. And then regarding the idea of the Confucian virtues, that's what Lao Tzu goes on to, after describing dark virtue, he addresses the ideas of Ren and Yi. He says, when day is lost, Benevolence appears. That's Ren. When benevolence is lost, righteousness, Yi, appears. When righteousness is lost, propriety, Li, appears. Propriety is the thin edge of loyalty and good faith, and the beginning of disorder. Intelligence is the flower of Tao, and the beginning of ignorance. Great people abide in the solid and reject the flimsy, abide in the fruit and not in the flower. Thus they put away one and choose the other. Okay, so what he's saying is when day is lost, benevolence appears. When benevolence is lost, righteousness appears. So benevolence, Ren, that's the Confucian concept of virtue, how to behave in society. And righteousness, Yi, is the idea of selflessness, of acting for others, altruism. So and they're both rooted to the concept of Li, propriety. What does the customs of your society say you should do? What is the appropriate behavior? Because that transmits the wisdom of the ages, which have been handed down from one generation to the next. It wouldn't have existed as a custom, so says Confucius, if it didn't have some kind of value to it. So if you can subdue yourself, control yourself, and act appropriately, then you can become a superior person, says Confucius. What Lao Tzu seems to be saying is, if you're thinking about all these categories of behavior and you're dissecting virtues into the 5 primary virtues, and you've described this dogmatic rule book for how to behave, you've already lost the battle, because you've lost this concept of the unity of the Tao. You're over-intellectualizing things, which is the beginning of disorder. You've tried to create this extremely ordered worldview. Well, now you're guaranteeing a disordered society. It seems to be what Lao Tzu is saying. Confucius will respond, oh, that kind of thinking without study is just simple-mindedness. It'll lead to disorder. So you can argue it either way, and you can, and the question is, do you agree or disagree with Lao Tzu in dismissing these virtues of Ren and Yi? Do you think you should spend your life constantly studying what the nature of the good is and how to behave appropriately, which is something Socrates, for example, certainly did? Or do you think you should just cultivate passivity and allow the innate force of the Tao to unfold naturally, or some balance of the two? That's what you need to address while addressing this question. Now, this idea about the intelligence is the flower of Tao, but it's not the fruit. So the flowers are beautiful. People are attracted to the flowers. The flower would be courtly behavior, someone who's eloquent and knows all of the appropriate ways to open a door and exactly what to say, and they seem at ease in any kind of high society. That's the flower of formality, of Li, of propriety. But Lao Tzu is saying, abide by the fruit, which is just simple, natural behavior. Just act naturally, because people are naturally good. If you act naturally, you'll be a good person. So that's, all right, so continuing here, I'm going to get a little bit to his cosmology, which makes some sense of his philosophy, but so just reading through some various excerpts. In section 16 on page 68, he says, reach the height of emptiness, strive for stillness. 10,000 things flourish together and then return. Things grow luxuriously and then return to the root. To return to the root is to achieve stillness. To achieve stillness is to reach the goal. Okay, so the root. Now I'm going to skip over to page 69, which is in section 25. It actually starts at the bottom of page 68. So he's saying, we saw in section 16, to return to the root is to achieve stillness. To achieve stillness is to reach the goal. So what is the root? So now section 25, there was something indefinite existing before heaven and earth, still, formless, alone, unchanging, reaching everywhere without becoming exhausted. It may be called the mother of 10,000 things. I do not know its name. I call it Tao. If pressed, I call it great. Great, it flows constantly. Flowing, it goes far away. Far away, it returns. Therefore, Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, the king is also great. In the universe, 4 are great, and the king is one of them. Humans take their law from the earth takes its law from heaven takes its law from Tao, and Tao takes its law from what it is. So comparing this to other philosophies like the Hindu philosophy and Plato's philosophy and the Buddhist philosophy, this idea of the root of being, the Tao, he says there was something indefinite existing before heaven and earth, this formless, alone and unchanging, the mother of 10,000 things. It's very similar to Plato's concept of the mother substance in his dialogue, the Timaeus. And that's the outer horizon of the cosmos, which the Hindus call Akasha, which is translated as ether, which Plato also identifies with the ether, where he says the absolute ideas exist. Ideal justice, ideal beauty. The idea of the good itself is this outermost container. As the source, as the root, it's like the Father, and as this outermost, all-embracing, encompassing sphere, it's the Mother. And for Taoism, it's the yin and the yang. The yin is the female, the yang is the male. So if you look at it in terms of Big Bang cosmology, there's a gravitational singularity. It explodes, it's the root of being, and then everything is absorbed in the outermost horizon of the cosmos, where space-time is expanding at the speed of light. As I've discussed in previous videos, the holographic string theory, the latest in point of evolution of academic physics, from general relativity to quantum mechanics to string theory. That theory says the past, the present, and the future are interwoven in this outermost sphere, and they radiate back in on these fundamental threads of energy to create the holographic illusion of three-dimensional space. So from that cosmology, I think it helps us make a little more sense of this kind of language. There was something indefinite existing before heaven and earth, still formless, alone, unchanging, reaching everywhere without becoming exhausted. It may be called the mother of 10,000 things. I don't know its name, I call it Tao. If pressed, I call it great. Great, it flows constantly. Flowing, it goes far away it returns. Therefore, Tao is great. Okay, so if everything explodes from the source of being, and it's absorbed by that same source of being, so according to this cosmology, the root of being is also the outermost, all-embracing, when it flows, it goes far away it returns. So by expanding far away, it's actually returning to its root. According to Big Bang cosmology, it's the same way, in the sense that at each point of this outermost sphere, from each point of that encompassing container, the Big Bang is echoing back. Each point is as if it's the Big Bang. So from the root, this gravitational singularity, out to this encompassing border, you're heading back to the source of being. And that just seems to be mirrored here in the Dao-de-Jing. So there's a famous book, The Tao of Physics, which talks about parallels between the Dao-de-Jing and 20th century physics. So you could see something similar in that verse number 25. But notice that the king is also great. So there's four things: the Tao, heaven, earth, and the king. They're all interrelated. There was one system. And this is related to the question of why does Lao Tzu think the best government is least active? Because the king is already part of the universal system. So the less the king does, or the ruling authority does, the better, because your conscious intervention is just going to mess up the flow of the Tao. So now I'm going to go back, and on page 68, section 17, he says, the best rulers, the people don't even know that they're there. The next best they love and praise. The next best they fear. The worst they despise. When rulers lose faith in their people, people lose faith in their rulers. But notice, the best rulers, you don't even know they're there. Work done, things accomplished, the people say, we did these things ourselves. So that's the best form of leadership. You wouldn't even know you had a leader. That's the ideal form. The leader's there, the leader's in tune with the Tao, and then automatically everybody else just falls into their natural place. That's this Taoist ideal. So continuing in that idea, section 20 on page 68, renounce learning and have no troubles. Yes and no, how far apart are they? Good and evil, how far apart are they? Section 19 says, renounce sagacity, discard wisdom, people will profit 100-fold. Renounce benevolence, which is Ren, discard righteousness, which is Yi, people will again practice filial piety. Renounce artistry, discard profit-seeking, there will be no robbers and thieves. So this whole idea of trying to perfect yourself, perfect your personal virtues, which Confucius advocates, Lao Tzu is saying, the more you strive for perfection, the more you're going to lead towards disorder and contention. And when he said renounce learning and have no troubles, that's definitely against Confucius's idea of you should spend your life in study and perfecting your knowledge of things. And I'll go back to Confucius after we do an overview of the Dao-de-Jing. So then, section number 37, Tao does nothing, yet there is nothing it does not do. If kings and princes can hold to it, the 10,000 things will transform themselves. If I desire this transformation, I will express it by the nameless uncarved wood. So the uncarved wood, just let nature be what it is. Don't try to sculpt it. And that's the hard thing for humans to do, is to not do anything. So is that just being lazy? Not according to Lao Tzu. It's just being wise, because you have faith in this underlying ordering principle. So on section 47 in page 69, he says, I'm just going to read the last sentence, which just says, accomplish without trying. Then section 57, govern by rectifying, fight cleverly, take the kingdom without trying. Skipping down a little bit, the more laws there are, the more criminals there are. Therefore, a sage says, I do nothing, and the people transform themselves. I love stillness, and the people correct themselves. I have no business, and the people prosper themselves. I have no ambition, and the people attain the uncarved wood themselves. When the government is dull, the people are good. When the government is meddling, the people are disappointed. So, there's his philosophy for why the best government is least active. The best government is least meddlesome would be Lao Tzu's description of it, because the Tao is active already. Let the Tao do its thing, and everyone will be okay. Now, and also, so in the Tao, so that's question 5, part B. Question 6, why does Lao Tzu criticize the Confucian virtues of Ren and Yi? For the same reason he criticizes meddlesome government. You're trying to be perfect, which guarantees increasing imperfection, because the excellence of the Tao is the natural goal of the natural process. So just learn to pull back and relax and let things happen naturally. That's why Lao Tzu criticizes meddlesome government and the Confucian virtues of Ren and Yi. But let's give Confucius his say, and I think he's got some good comebacks. And so I'll just briefly go through a few selections from The Analects. So on page 41, Confucius says, the superior person attends to the root of things. From the root grows the way, Tao. Filial piety and fraternal submission are the root of benevolence, Ren. So for Confucius, you should focus on your social obligations, especially to your parents, to your prince, to the government, and to your friends. And focus on relationships of husband and wife. So your social relationships, you should learn exactly the appropriate behavior for each of those. And that's what Ren is, virtue, or also translated as benevolence. And he categorizes 5 on page 444, section 17.6. Z. Kang asked Confucius about perfect virtue, Ren. Confucius said, to be able to practice 5 things everywhere under heaven constitute perfect virtue. He begged to know what they were and was told, seriousness, generosity, sincerity, diligence, and kindness. If you're serious, you won't be treated with disrespect. If you're generous, you'll win all hearts. If you're sincere, you'll be trusted. If you're diligent, you'll accomplish much. If you're kind, you'll enjoy the service of others. So there's Ren, and he categorizes it, and that is what Lao Tzu has a problem with. all that giving names to things is every step you take towards your perfect explication is one further step away from the obliterating realization of the unity of everything in the Tao, which can't be named. But continuing on page 444, Confucius says this, section 17.8. The master said, have you heard the 6 things followed by the 6 confusions? You replied, I haven't. Sit down and I'll tell you. The love of benevolence without the love of learning leads to an ignorant simplicity. This is what Confucius would probably say about Lao Tzu's doctrine. It's ignorant simplicity. Oh yeah, the Tao will take care of everything. The government should just sit on its hands and the people will become good by themselves. Sure they will. That's ignorant simplicity. The love of knowledge without the love of learning leads to dissipation of mind. The love of sincerity without the love of learning leads to recklessness. The love of straightforwardness without the love of learning leads to rudeness. The love of boldness without the love of learning leads to insubordination. The love of strength of character without the love of learning leads to extravagance. So Confucius would say, okay, Lao Tzu, you're saying, oh, once you start talking about Ren and Yi and how to behave appropriately according to Li, which is the laws of propriety, that's all a sign of degeneration. Well, okay, I can kind of see what you're saying a little bit, but in practice, what you'll get is people saying, oh, I'm acting naturally, and they're just going to be rude, stubborn, vapid-minded fools because they haven't spent the time studying exactly what the good is and what the precise way to be virtuous is. And your uncarved block will just be an insubordinate, vapid-minded fool. That's probably how Confucius would respond. I can see the strong points of both sides. So for the exam, as long as I know you've read both sides, and whatever opinion you have is fine, so long as it's backed up with an understanding of what these guys are trying to say. Here's another one in response, Confucius responding. He says on page 4, he's not actually responding to Lao Tzu himself, but to the same kinds of arguments that Lao Tzu was coming up with. On page 433, section 727, the master said, maybe some act without knowing why. I don't. Hearing much, selecting what is good, and following it, seeing much and remembering it are the second style of knowledge. So he's saying, wu wei, just act naturally without intentionally doing it. Okay, maybe some can do that. I don't know what you're talking about. I have to study out what I'm doing very carefully. Then, and only then, do I know that I'm acting appropriately. On the other hand, if you look on page 43 at the right-hand column at the bottom, section 13.6, the master said, if a ruler acts correctly, he can govern without issuing orders. If he acts incorrectly, his orders won't be followed. So that's similar to what Lao Tzu is saying. So you see that they're both saying you need to be aware of the Tao, so they're not polar opposite theories. It's just a matter of, I think, more kind of, Lao Tzu would be more kind of the hippie side of Taoism, and Confucius would be more, the kind of straight-laced work ethic side of the same basic ideal. So if you combine the two, I think you have a more well-rounded understanding. So I think that's sufficient for our purposes for the exam questions. So that's questions part B, number 5 and 6. And in the next video, I'll be going over Plato's Republic.